Hey Fitheads, today we have Marco Altini. He's a data scientist, super smart person, computer science engineering, human movement science, and also a runner. And he knows a whole lot about HRV, heart rate variability, and completely changed how I feel about stress and how I track it.
Yeah. And what stress is.
Yeah.
We were talking a lot about acute stress, meaning like, oh, there's a fire versus like sort of an overarching stress, which is like,
Yeah.
I don't know how I'm going to get through the rest of this pandemic, sort of like a long thing, and how you can track and measure both of those things and how both of those things affect you and how you can work through them and all that stuff.
Yeah, how you can train relating to all of that information. It's crazy.
Yeah. Welcome to Total Fitheads.
Serious fitness for not so serious people.
Hi, Marco. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm so stoked to talk to you about stress.
My favorite topic.
Yeah, so we just had Jeff on from Rise Science, and he suggested that you're the dude to talk about of how to improve my HRV or just even know what it is. So we'd love to get like just a foundation of what is HRV to help our audience understand.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, when we talk about HRV, let's say that technically speaking, we talk about the difference between consecutive heartbeats. Our heart beats at a certain frequency, and when we have 60 beats per minute, it's not really one every second. There is always some variation between consecutive beats, and that's what we quantify. So that's when we talk about heart rate variability, it's just a generic term for different ways you can quantify this variability. And the reason why we do that is that typically this variation is due to how the body responds to stresses, and in particular, the autonomic nervous system controls heart rhythm. And when we face a stressor, we have a certain response, which typically means we have a reduction in heart rate variability, for example, which signals we are facing a stressor. And that's something we can measure non-invasively with technology today, and that's why it becomes relevant as we face stressors all the time, from training to anything associated to lifestyle. Then we can use this information to see how our body responds and make basically small adjustments, trying to keep things in balance and optimize health or performance depending on, again, our interest or needs.
Yeah, and it seems HRV is a bit trendy now if it reached people like me and Max, but you've been doing this for a while, right? Tell us about starting and working on this.
Yeah, it's been a few years. I would say at this point, maybe 7-8 years ago, I developed technology to measure HRV using the phone camera, so without external sensors. That's our app, which is called HRV4Training. And we validated this technology with respect to ECG, chest straps, so showed that it's equivalent, and then you can do that without any sensors. And that's a bit how I personally started into this. I have a background in computer science, engineering, PhD in data science, and then I got later into sports science and got another degree in high performance coaching. And my interest was then more let's say, moved from the technology side more to the applied side of things, and how we use this information in the context of sport, exercise, or in general just to manage stress. And yeah, as you say, now there are many options. There are more sensors. Currently, I work also some days per week with Oura as a data science advisor. So they make a ring to measure a series of parameters. Among them, exactly, you got one, HRV during the night. So that's another way that you can do it without, for example, having to take a measurement first thing in the morning, which, for many people is okay. Others tend to forget or prefer, not to have it, or simply cannot do it because maybe they have small kids jumping in bed at any hour of the night. So that just doesn't work. So, different options. I think you can obtain similar insights once you do a few things right. I think there's a bit of confusion out there typically because you can do it in many different ways, and it's easy then to get it wrong simply because what we measure is, as I was saying earlier, just the autonomic nervous system response to stress. and that's changing all the time. So if you have coffee and you measure, then what you measure is this transitory response that says nothing about your chronic stress level, which is actually what you care about. So then, there are just small things and I would say best practices that we need to follow if we want to use the data effectively.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. I guess I'm curious about both like the type of sensor you're using and then like the way you're looking at stuff, because I, like you saw, have an Oura. I also strap on a Whoop every night and sleep on a smart mattress, and now have recently been using your camera sensor. And it seems that they're all like, whether it's taking an average or like the end, your last deep sleep, or that like 1 moment in 1 minute in time for your app, like what is most effective, or is it really they're all like different great ways to do it? Like what?
All right, so let's say that there are, let's say that historically, the morning measurement is what has been done the most in research, because the technology was not there typically to measure in other times. So you had people come to the lab, and then you would have them, rest on a bed and tell them, okay, now relax. And then you would measure, something that would just never work to measure actually physiological stress, because, they are completely outside of their routine and their the typical environment they would actually do things. But anyways, that's how it started. So we started collecting it that way. And then things got a bit easier. Now, many studies use the technology you mentioned, so to measure during the night or in the morning using our apps or other apps. Elite HRV that connects to a strap, for example, is another option that provides the same data because it's the same routine. So in terms of the alternative to the morning measurement, you have night data. And in terms of night data, also there is no, let's say, no gold standard. You have to decide what you think makes sense in terms of capturing this underlying physiological process. Typically using the whole night, I think, is a good way to do it, because there are changes in heart rate variability during the night, which are, one, due to the circadian rhythm. So, as you rest, your HRV tends to rise a bit during the night, the same way that your resting heart rate goes down. So that happens. And then you have changes in, let's say, on a minute-to-minute basis because of the different sleep stage, right? So different sleep stages cause different autonomic responses and different HRV. That's actually why these devices are able, to a certain extent, to estimate sleep stages. It's just because your physiology is changing. So in my opinion, it's better to use more data because you average out these differences and you capture the baseline physiology, more than trying to pick, a very specific moment, which is difficult to get right, so to speak. We will never be able to detect sleep stages with 100% accuracy. It's just not possible. And yeah, I was listening to your talk with Jeff, so you know that already. But the way we validate these models are just inherently inaccurate, because we rely on a reference that has people deciding what sleep stage is that, and they agree like 80%, 85% of the time. And then that's the reference for the sensor. So the sensor gets that even less right. And then you get maybe 60, 65% of the time you get it right. And that's a success, like state of the art in sleep staging. But, can you say then that at 4:55 you were in deep sleep? You cannot really say that. So that's why I think in general that the more data, the better. So we, don't try to isolate some very specific moment that is unlikely that we can isolate. And then we rely on the underlying processes that tend to show up very well in the averages, as well as the morning measurements. Because, sometimes you think, okay, but in the morning it's also just 1 minute. But then you're conscious, so you're not affected by sleep stages. And then as long as you wake up at a similar time, also the circadian rhythm, it's more or less at the same time. So these confounders actually don't happen there, which is why it's normally the morning routine also tends to work similarly. And you should see the same trends in the data collected in these two different ways.
Right. Yeah, well, when you're saying that more data is better, it seems that the Oura doesn't just tell, like with my sleep score or my energy score or whatever, the main thing that says like, this is how you should feel today. it's not just based on HRV. It's also talking about your resting heart rate throughout the night. I think it takes into account how much you've worked out, or at least told it that you've worked out. It's like there's a lot of things that go into it, your body temperature or whatever. Do you think that's better than just HRV?
You're gonna get me in trouble here. So let's say that my personal opinion is that once you look at HRV as a marker of physiological, you did. So if you slept poorly, or if your activity level was too much for your body and you responded poorly, and you are in any of these situations, then it will be reflected in your HRV. If you don't see it in your HRV, it means that your body responded well. So I don't think we should be creating a score that is penalizing you for what you did if it did not have an impact on your body. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think HRV is a great point where you can start. And it doesn't mean that's the only thing you should look at, because other physiological signals might carry some different information. Think about temperature that you mentioned. If you're someone with a regular menstrual cycle, for example, the impact of that on temperature is much more obvious than the impact it has on resting heart rate and HRV. Even though there is also there a component, you can see it better in other signals. So that could still be informative for you, but it doesn't mean that, if you put all of them together, it becomes more the signal that was important for you.
Okay. So yeah, okay. And I think you kind of mentioned earlier that we should see, depending, even though they're different like ways of measuring, they should kind of trend together, and that's what you would see. Okay. I don't know. I'm having trouble connecting like what my Whoop says to what Oura says to how I feel.
I mean, though, in terms of the HRV data, morning measurements or night averages, they should carry the same information. So if you face stronger stressors, weekly averages should tend to align pretty well. This does not mean that the scores they provide or we provide should align, because everybody making up these scores, like everybody means well. They are trying to tell you something with the data they have about recovery, but at the same time, I think it's just difficult not to trivialize very complex processes there. That's why normally I prefer just to look at the HRV data as a marker of stress. And then it doesn't mean that that's the only thing you look at, but it's one piece. And it's the only non-invasive objective measure of stress that we have. So it's a good starting point to put together with your training load, the things you're doing, and the other stressors that give you context for what happened and how you feel subjectively, right? So that's also one component of it. If you think about things like muscle soreness, it's not captured by this data, so you will just never have it there, that component. So that's why it doesn't replace everything entirely. It's just a way to capture stress response. But yeah, some other aspects you still need to either subjectively or in other ways keep them into account.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. Like how Whoop just looks at your cardiovascular stress, and I see a disconnect because I have such muscle soreness. But like, how much does muscle soreness affect your HRV? If you're doing zero cardio, but like crushing a bodybuilding workout, like that's still going to mess with your central nervous system. So I just like kind of trying to understand the connection between cardio, muscle soreness, and HRV.
Yeah, so I would say that soreness per se is not something that will be reflected in your HRV, but the fact that you do a workout, even that is not, an endurance workout, a cardio workout or anything, that still it's a stressor for your body. So that's what matters. That's why, for example, we use HRV also for, things that are not training related, right? It doesn't matter actually where the stressor comes from, because your body will have to deal with the stressor in a way that is typically reflected in your HRV. So that's why, for example, when you travel or if you have alcohol or any of these factors have an impact on your physiology and on your HRV. And in the context of training, typically what matters is the volume of what you do with respect to what you're used to. So even if you do a sport that is not an endurance sport, but then one day you do a lot more than what you're used to, or you have a different stimulus, so you do a different type of workout, so that you're not just not used to. These two typically are the ones that play a role and have an impact on your physiology and HRV, regardless of an endurance component or a cardio component in there. So that's why it becomes still useful, even if you do strength or resistance exercise. You see that there is an acute response because it's just the body's response to the stressor.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about like mental stress versus workout stress? It sounds like you're saying they're the same thing.
Yeah, for your body, typically it is. Often you cannot separate them. So, which I think is a good thing in this case, because, if what you were capturing was only due to the workout, the input was only the workout, then why would you even measure it? Because you know already what workout you did. And, once you have the training impulse, you could call it, then you know the response of the system that is your body. But you never know that, because you can respond differently to the same stressor based on what other stressors are present in your life in that moment. Maybe you are particularly stressed because there is a pandemic, or you have something to do with work, with family. So all of that will have an impact, because I think it's easy to understand that our capacity to handle stress is limited, right? So we all have moments that we feel overwhelmed because of stress, and there is only so much you can do. And so if you're already in a situation where you have many stressors, then the workout stressor will just be yet another stress, and it's not the only one that is captured when you go to measure your physiology.
Would it be possible to capture a difference in like a long-lasting dull stress versus a pandemic versus a tiger?
Hit workout. Tiger.
Yeah. So I think, indeed, as you say, we have two responses normally that we consider, like acute stressors, chronic stressors. So acute stressors is normally what happens within 48 hours. So that's the workout, that's the intercontinental travel, when that was a thing. And then, all sorts of things that it's a transition, and then you should go back to normal and respond positively. And then there are chronic stressors, which might affect you for much longer. It's also more difficult to capture them, I would say, when you look at the data. Say you start already in that condition. Maybe actually you start tracking these things because something happened, some health condition or burnout at work or overtraining. Then when you start measuring, you just don't know if that's your normal or if you're already in that suppressed state. That's difficult because you didn't measure before, and everything here is always meaningful only in relative terms, right? With respect to your history, there is like no norms basically when you talk about these numbers. So that's a bit more challenging. Normally, you have to collect longitudinal data, try things, different training, different diet, sleep, all the typical factors that have an impact. Trying to work on those to see if you can bring also longer term changes and not only deal better with the acute strong stressors.
Yeah, there's so much there that I want to unpack. Okay. So when you're talking about like there's no norm, it seems like a lot of these apps are like, no, don't try and compare yourself to other numbers, just look at your own self. It also worries me that like if my last 7 days were like really crappy and I have like a kind of okay day on my Whoop, it comparatively will tell me it's great. And I guess, okay, first thing, compared to people at least like your age and gender and whatever, is that still a bad thing to do? Is it to do that kind of comparison?
Even if you narrow it down to someone that is very similar to you, unless it's your twin, then I don't think there is
really,
because the genetic component is really strong. So yeah, older people have lower HRV, but I mean, what does that mean, right? I know, you could have someone that is 30 years older than you and has higher HRV, and still that would not tell you anything. Like the overlap between categories is enormous. So there is very little to gain there, and even healthier ranges are, starting from very low values of HRV, still could be totally healthy. Yeah, I think to me it's a much better marker of stress than of fitness, for example, right? So if you look at resting heart rate, very unusual to have a very fit person. Let's consider even endurance athletes. So almost impossible to have a very fit person with a high heart rate. But HRV, they could be all over the place, and it will have very little relationship with their performance level. It's just something different. That's why we use it, on a day-to-day basis to track stress response, make adjustments, and keep them in their optimal range. But we don't necessarily want to go anywhere else, because often it's not even possible to do that. It's just the baseline just does not change that much. And I don't mean it's not possible to change it. If you start from, unfit, unhealthy diet, all of that, okay, anything in that case will make you better, and you will get also the HRV a bit higher. But if you already check all the boxes, then, you could, most likely see no changes there. And it's fine. It's just not the way that, the data is used in a helpful way, in my opinion.
Wow. Okay, you've just removed a lot of stress from my brain, because I've been trying to see my HRV improve over time, and even Whoop shows you month to month if you're trending upward or downward, but that shouldn't even be a goal, you're saying, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. And consider also that there are seasonal changes. So maybe you did a lot of work and you are the same as 4 months ago, but there's a season in which you should be lower, because summer and winter are different. So, you could still have gained something that you don't know, because there is a stronger component in there that is not something that is quantified in how your trend is changing in the app and the way it shows it to you. So, like the way normally HRV is a bit lower in the months between October and January, for example, in your hemisphere. So then if you have something that is like that, the changes that happen are still confounded somehow by this. So the very long-term trend is very difficult to interpret.
Wow. Okay.
I thought there were breathing exercises.
Yeah, to try and improve. Well, you have an app that does that, right?
Yeah. I've been trying to do that more and more since we made this app. And, there have been some changes, but can I be sure that this change is due to, doing deep breathing 30, 40 minutes per day? It's hard because, first of all, this is at a different scale. Again, when you have an acute stressor, it's easy. You do something and then you measure right after and you see if there is an impact. So it's easy to quantify. While if I talk about, okay, my HRV in the past 40 days has improved a bit, but how many things happened in these 40 days apart from the deep breathing? So yeah, maybe that was a positive stressor, and it's training your parasympathetic system, so it does make sense. But at the same time, so many people tried that and it didn't happen, and maybe my HRV would have increased even if I was not doing that. I just cannot know, right? I cannot be sure. So I think these longer term trends and changes due to biofeedback or deep breathing forms in any of the forms, I think are fascinating, really interesting to explore, but it's very difficult to, especially when you do it just yourself and it's not a systematic study, it's very difficult then to be certain about what was behind the change.
And so just to confirm, you say you take a ton of Olympians and look at their HRV, they aren't going to trend higher than average people. It's just all over the place.
So the average person right now is very unhealthy. So I would have compared to that maybe. But still, it's you could, among themselves, it could be all over the place, like from an RMSSD of 20 to 100, and that would be fine.
Crazy. Okay.
For just simple example, marathoners that run in less than 2 hours and a half a marathon. So it's not, not the very best, but still, pretty decent times.
Yeah.
I've seen people with RMSSDs from 30 to, again, 150, 200. So absolutely nothing in there. But none of them had, a resting heart rate higher than 45, though. So that's, to my point that I said earlier. So it's just different what the two signals, that come from what you can measure from the heart tell you.
Interesting. Okay. Have you looked at all at pollution or like where you live connected to heart rate? This is just self-serving. I worry about being in LA and if that's just like keeping me messed up.
I don't know, honestly. I haven't looked into it. I'm sure there is research, looking at these aspects. But I think it's also difficult to look at this systematically because of the usual issues of comparing people and different groups. And, even if you take them very similar, but again, unless they are twins or something like that, it's very difficult to isolate the genetic component of your baseline.
Okay. And so when you're talking about doing breathing exercise, like HRV for biofeedback, tell us about that. And is it just for acute stress then?
So the goal there is to train the parasympathetic system with this deep breathing exercises. Let's say that so normally, these techniques are used maybe effectively in the context more of anxiety and depression more than sport performance. Looking at the literature in exercise and sport performance, I think there it's really all over the place, both in terms of the protocols, like much worse than a regular HRV assessment, where still there's a lot of confusion, but now we are, there is the morning measurement, the night measurement, and we use the same metric, which is RMSSD. So I think over the past 10 years, things got much more consistent across the board, which is good, but that's just to assess, like you measure and you look where you are at and, how stress changes in response to what you do, but then you can do an intervention like biofeedback and try to see, can I influence that? Can I improve, my baseline HRV? And there, and also, most importantly, can I have an impact on performance, for example, when doing that? Because again, that should be in the context of this intervention. So the goal is, to get the athlete better more than to get their physiology better, even though the two might be linked. So there, you have protocols where they are like, okay, let's do that 2 minutes per day. And then there are protocols where they do it for 1 hour per day. So that's a huge difference, right? And the results are very inconsistent. So I think that, the reason why we developed this tool is to give people the ability to experiment and to just make it simpler to try out these things and see what you can learn, if you can have, if you can influence your baseline physiology by doing that. Like the acute response is fairly systematic. You do the deep breathing, your HRV is super high in that moment, blood pressure improves, like you have all sorts of nice physiological responses while you do it. But the big question is, of course, if I do this every day, then will I get a positive benefit also in the baseline physiology? I think that's what's interesting and worth exploring more, but I don't think we have these answers just yet.
Okay. Yeah. It seems like since starting, you're collecting a lot more data. And do you see more like average people now using your app too?
Yeah, I think so. Also the HRV4Training app is, it's been there many years. I think there's a very broad spectrum. This I think many people understand that it's just a way to track stress and physiology. And, it's not just the elite athletes anymore. So because, the app is cheap and easy to use, so you don't need, any particular infrastructure or to spend much money. So it's very simple to start that way. Then, of course, you need to have a bit of an interest in this kind of things. So that's why athletes typically are the people that look into this. And, especially when you have something that is not, like you use an Oura ring or a Whoop, they measure as you sleep. So you don't have to do anything. If you use an app where you have to take a morning measurement, you need to be a bit motivated to do that. So, typically athletes are the people that would do that, while other people that, don't have that goal to improve or to train, no matter their level, then it's just not gonna happen. It's just not gonna be a thing tracking, okay, let's just track my stress and make some changes. If there is no exercise component in there, I see that it's difficult. Even with athletes, maybe they race and then there is the off season, and then the first thing they drop, okay, now I don't measure for a couple of weeks. Even though it would be interesting to see the change, right? When you are then what happens after racing, when you get back to normal, and then as you build up after the off season, but it's the first thing you drop when you have to do something.
What do you think the minimum amount of time would be to say, to decide that thing had an impact? Like if I don't drink coffee for 1 day versus 30 days, or if I stop, smoking crack for 1 day versus a week.
So normally, for longer term changes, what we use to define what is normal for you in the app is the past 2 months. So we tried different things, and there are different trade-offs between, obviously the strong acute stressors and longer term changes. As you were saying earlier, there is, if you've been down all week and then today you're higher again, then are you good because you're better than you were this week that was, however, much lower than your normal, or are you still below your normal? Yeah. So in our opinion, you need to look at much data to answer that question. So at the end of the day, we settle over 2 months as something that is meaningful in the context of your long-term changes in physiology and the more acute recent stressors. And I think that that gives you a decent picture of what is going on.
That must be hard for you because people want the immediate answer. I drank a glass of water in the morning and now I'm healthy. Whereas sounds like what you're talking about is really zooming out over months, if not more than months.
Yeah, certainly. So you can, in a way, you can get around that, meaning that, so you have these 2 months for what is normal for you. And then you have your baseline, which is just this week, so 7 days. And then there is today. So you have 3 levels. So today, you could be, it could be that you had a strong stressor yesterday. So today your HRV is highly suppressed. And that's already an information you have today to do something about it. For example, reduce training intensity. But then when some time has passed and you look back at this, then you would look more at the 2 months normal values. So, the longer term trends and where your baseline was with respect to that. So the moving average. So that gives you, again, really more the big picture, especially when you look retrospectively at the data. But still on a day-to-day basis, then you go and look more at the daily score more than the moving average, because it captures better the acute stressors, and typically as you live your life, you have a better connection with that because it's what you just did yesterday or the other day, and at the same time, when you look retrospectively, you could see that maybe you have a month where you had a really bad month, and you were, often you had very low values, and you see that and say, okay, this was a period of my life and my values were all low and so on and so on. But then while you are living that, you cannot use a tool that every single day is telling you that you are in that condition. Like, that is also not helpful. So then picking up the daily scores and seeing that sometimes, they're still within your normal or higher, I think it makes sense. You have, I think, to work with the 2 different time scales at different times. And it's not easy, it's just how physiology changes in response to stressors. But I think despite all of this, it can be insightful and even easy to use sometimes.
When you're talking about the daily scores, is it that you want to just wake up and look at that, you recovered overnight, awesome score, awesome score, awesome score? Or is it I should be, do I want to see this waves of trained hard, recovered over day to day kind of thing? Because if you're just getting consistent awesome scores, maybe you're not training hard enough. What really are you looking for on a like short-term trend?
Yeah, so I think normally you really want to be within your normal, so in that optimal zone all the time.
Oh,
So when
wow,
I
okay.
look at data, yeah. So if, for example, I look at data of I don't know, triathletes that go to Kona, like top 10, 15 Ironman in the world, their data is basically never below normal except for the day after Kona, right? So they are always responding well to training, and it's not that they're not training enough, right? It's like 25, 30 hours per week. There's a lot of training, a lot of intensity, and but it's what they do. And if they have a problem, then you will see it in the data. It will be reflected there. They will go down, but that means they didn't respond well, or there was another stressor, or they were sick. It's just not what you expect. So normally stability is really what you aim for, not swings. Also in HRV, like if you have a large suppression, it doesn't mean that you did that great training. It means that you responded poorly to what you did.
Okay.
More than anything, it's really about the response more than anything. That's why it's interesting, I think, because it's you never know until you measure how your body responded to the stressor, and if it responds well, and you go through a high training, a high volume or high intensity block, and your HRV stays where it should be, it's great confirmation that you did great during that block. So I think that's also where when you don't have changes but still it's helpful, because it gives you confidence that you were doing well for what else you're training at your level at that point.
So this is a measurement that like something's wrong.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, most likely, yes. And you can take it also from another angle. Some people are like, okay, I use HRV, then I use only that to guide my training. So if it is green or good, I go hard until it's not. That's like the opposite of what you should be doing, because you just don't want to go there. So what you should do is really, like in anything else, start with a program periodization, whatever it is, in your sport, and then you use it to make adjustments, not the other way around. So if exactly something, if it's suppressed, then something was wrong. It's just this. Yeah, you shouldn't see that normally if
A
everything
low
goes well.
score is never good unless you just competed and you really wanted to just like destroy yourself and go as hard as possible.
If you competed, totally fine.
Okay.
Exactly. Or if you're about to compete, even if it is race day or something like that, it's maybe you travel somewhere to race or to compete, and then you wake up at a time that has nothing to do with your usual time, and then maybe you're a bit excited. So on that day also it's irrelevant, because your body is just less parasympathetic for a million reasons that are not a problem, most likely. So those are the 2 days in which it doesn't really matter.
Interesting. So you're still ready to perform even though like on a race day it might be lower.
Yeah, there are so many factors that happen in that specific day that I think it's that's why you shouldn't look at it that day. It can only create a problem for your head.
Just don't look.
Yeah.
Okay, so you never want a low score. And I guess, I shouldn't just start drinking one night because I haven't seen my score go down in a while.
That's easier than to take it down that way, though.
Yeah.
Is there a group? It seems sort of self-serving, but is there a group, either athletes or I don't know, just some sort of demographic that deals better generally with stress than others? Race car drivers versus distance runners, or have you seen anything like that?
I don't know. I haven't looked at this systematically. I would say, people that are used to certain levels of, training, competition, and all of that, typically there is also more stability. A higher performer, you could say. I would assume there is, less oscillations, even on a day-to-day basis. I think you can see this also, in different groups, across different sports. The people that train well and perform well, their values tend to stay again within the normal range, or even higher or increasing as they build towards whatever is their competition. While for if you have I don't know, different athlete levels, so to speak, and the lower level goes through a similar program or some training intervention, normally you have more of these day-to-day changes, which is quantified in a way that's called the coefficient of variation of HRV. It just tells you, how much day-to-day variability you have. Like, so if you have a baseline, a moving average, of a score during a week, it could be that every day you had that score, or it could be that, it was jumping a lot and you had that score. So just the mean doesn't tell you anything when you summarize the data. But then there is this way to quantify just how much variability you have. And it is much higher, in certain groups, as you say, maybe the ones that are just not used to that training load, or even among professional athletes, say they go from the off season to starting training, pre-season, and they all get together even in team sports. And then the ones that the first week have this higher coefficient of variation, which just means the data is all over the place, then maybe they take longer time, to get up to speed, or their fitness progresses slowly. They take the load more poorly. So this, instability of the day-to-day variability is also a good marker of how you're responding to a stressor in a specific time. And it can certainly change based on, athlete level and all of that.
But you can't say that like soccer is better for you than tennis.
No, I don't think you can say that. No.
I will. I'll say it. It's way better.
So then you've seen, like, with overtraining, it's confirmed that, like, if you get a garbage reading, training that day is not actually going to help you. It's going to make you worse. There's no way that, like, still working out on a low HRV day is helpful for you physiologically.
So there are some good studies done recently addressing exactly this, which means, take two groups of people, split them, regular periodization. The other group is also regular periodization, but HRV guided. So that means that on a given day, their HRV score is low. And this is defined in different ways. For example, their baseline is below their normal values. So we don't look at the daily score actually here. We just look at the baseline. So it means basically they need to have a couple of days that are bad in reality before you implement a change. So when you implement that change, it means that you scale down the intensity. So say they had high intensity, it doesn't mean that they don't train. Maybe they do a moderate intensity workout or an easy workout. And at the end of the studies, I think 3 or 4 studies already at this point, the group that did the HRV guided training ended up accumulating a bit less high intensity training, because of course sometimes they had to skip it, but then they perform better on time trials and all sort of tests or performance tests, because that tells you that simply pushing when your body is already stressed is just not a good idea, which I think we can just understand even in simple terms, but they tested this quite systematically. But yeah, to answer your question, I think it's important also always to consider the athlete level, what they do normally. A lower, first of all, it's not just a lower score, but it's more like a couple of low scores, baseline going low. And second is, if you train every day and, it's just normal for you always to train, you don't have to skip a day unless, you're really feeling bad and sick. But if it's just more stress on your body, you can just reduce the intensity. Typically, that's what they do in these studies. It's really the high intensity stimulus that is the one that you want to avoid in that case, not the training per se. You can typically train.
So
how do you make prescriptions? It sounds like what you're doing is you're gathering data. But then how do you sort of make suggestions or prescriptions?